So I think that there should be very clear expectations around what Trump's arms export policy is to Israel, which is just build, 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 bomb, 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 send as many weapons as is profitable for us. And we can go back and forth on, whether this is an idea born in Trump's mind or whether it's an idea born in Netanyahu's. For communities, the idea that the Gaza war, as they call it, we would call it a genocide, I suppose, when it comes to this plan for the so-called Gaza Riviera, this idea that we're going to build basically Trump luxury hotels on the Mediterranean waterfront of Gaza, and then bring the people back from whatever relocation camps they were brought to live a life of luxury and Dubai-style development. My understanding or my perception of that policy is that what it does is it pitches the ambition so high, it's so outrageous, it so cuts against the norms, the expectations, institutions, and the longstanding diplomatic traditions in the region. Overstate the coherence of the Trump administration's approach, not only to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to global affairs at large. In truth, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I think there are a variety of perspectives that are now contending inside this kind of umbrella coalition that has been convened to the Trump 2.0 administration. I think we should try to understand what the correlation of forces is and the balance of power between the various factions. But one area where they do have a lot of consensus is on the strategic priority of not just resolving, I put that in quotation marks, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not just bringing some kind of deal to Israel and Palestine, but to advancing a very concrete project of dispossession, if not outright genocide, against the Palestinian people. We can go back and forth on, whether this is an idea born in Trump's mind or whether it's an idea born in Netanyahu's. But the simple fact is that there seems to be a consensus, not just in the Republican Party, but also in parts of the Democratic establishment in Washington as well, that the only true solution, and terrifyingly, those are the words that they're using, the only true solution is in fact the removal of Palestinian bodies, families, communities, traditions, heritage, homes from this territory that they now want to brand as Greater Israel. I think that's really the terrifying point, is that even as we see various maneuvers, perspectives, traditions of international relations thinking find a home in the Trump administration, all those places seems to have found a kind of strong consensus, not just to support a way forward for the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is indeed to remove Palestinians from their historical territories, of course, in clear and strict violation of international humanitarian law, of the UN Charter, and so on. And that's something that they have very little truck for, very little time for, and very little respect for, the foundations of the international legal system that, of course, was supposed to bring peace and prosperity indivisible to the world at large. There are mechanisms that the U.S. government has used, both in the Biden administration and now in the Trump administration, that are overt, that are covert, that are quiet, and that are loud, that are all designed with the same goal in mind, which is the dispossession, the ethnic cleansing of the occupied Palestinian territories of their indigenous peoples. We can talk about the silent annexation processes, a new architecture of apartheid that has been constructed just in the past year that succeeds to build gates around every Palestinian community, that succeeds to mobilize armed settlers to dispossess the farmers who are living in those places, on a new security architecture that both hems in those Palestinian communities and terrorizes them. And I'm just speaking about the West Bank. Right? And then there's the more overt aspects of this, the resumption of the exportation of 2,000-pound bombs to be dropped on Palestinian communities, the idea that the Gaza war, as they call it, we would call it a genocide, I suppose, but the idea that this is simply on pause, that the cessation of hostilities is only to be resumed, perhaps on the basis of a perceived betrayal of the terms and conditions of the ceasefire, which of course we've seen over 150 Palestinians killed in the course of that ceasefire, but it's the Israelis who are portraying themselves as victims of that broken deals. So I think that we have to look at the full array of tools that are now available. One really evident and visible aspect of this is stripping funding for the UNRWA, UNRWA. This is an agency that's tasked with a suite of services by the United Nations to protect, defend the basic sort of humanitarian rights of the Palestinian people, but also to do things like municipal waste provision, education, housing, basic services that can be provided to displaced families over the past 75 years, or 70 years since 75 years since the original Nakba of 1948. What is unprecedented that we're seeing in Israel is for a single individual nation to think that it has the roguish authority to override that of the United Nations that has given the mandate to the UN RWA. And what Israel can do is basically throw sand, so much sand in the gears of the operations of UNRWA, not just by stripping funding, but also by denying permits, preventing access and entry to basic key areas of the occupied territories that makes it effectively non-functional. Now, what is the net effect of that? Why does it why does it ultimately add up to a project of ethnic cleansing? Well, it basically makes key, large, important areas of the occupied territories unlivable. I mean, you're effectively talking about stripping out the most basic services for not thousands, but tens of thousands of families, education for school children, basic services that keep these communities alive. And so what's going to end up happening is those people are going to have to look for either new ways of living, new ways of resisting, or new places to go. And of course, that's the goal. The goal is to, as the US has done in other places, like Cuba, for example, or Zimbabwe, to impoverish and to foment the kind of social conditions that either lead to expulsion or to uprising, which then can create further cycles of violence and further justification for the either annihilation, extermination, or at least dispossession of the Palestinian people. Yeah, I think the lesson we've learned with Trump is to take him as literally as we can, as seriously as we can, with the caveat that the Trumpist worldview and approach to foreign affairs is very kaleidoscopic. It's saying a lot of things, seeing what sticks, offering a lot of things, seeing from where they can be bargained back to. And I think when it comes to this plan for the so-called Gaza Riviera, this idea that we're going to build basically Trump luxury hotels on the Mediterranean waterfront of Gaza, and then bring the people back from whatever relocation camps they were brought to live a life of luxury and Dubai-style development. My understanding or my perception of that policy is that what it does is it pitches the ambition so high, it's so outrageous, it so cuts against the norms, the expectations, institutions, and the longstanding diplomatic traditions in the region, that under the cover of that crazy plan, a lot of those other processes of the quiet, silent annexation can take place. As long as the world is distracted by this plan, is talking about the merits of something that is so outrageous, so impossible, so impractical, then the traditional mechanisms that have been deployed over the past several decades that slowly grind and dispossess and bulldoze some of these communities can kind of take place, not under the cover of darkness necessarily, but at least amidst the tremendous noise that's generated by this Trumpist position on the question of what is to be done about reconstruction of Gaza in the wake of 500 days of bombardment. So I think that the goal, in that sense, we should take the policy only as seriously as to consider what are the second order consequences of it being debated in the halls of Saudi Arabia or the Arab League or even the European Union. This idea that we need to be sort of laser focused on the letter of the proposal, I think gives a lot of license to the existing Israeli government to say, well, effectively for us, it's business as usual until we can get a firm answer on whether this plan is viable, which of course we all know it's not. The United States threw out its respect for the UN Arms Trade Treaty a long time ago, and I think it would be foolish for us to pin this squarely on the Trump administration because the deployments and export of arms, frankly, not just to Israel, also to places like Saudi Arabia when they were being deployed against the people of Yemen, for example. I mean, the list goes on and on and on about the extent of our arms trade, which is epicentral to what scholars in the United States call the warfare state, this quiet, developmental, secret welfare state that keeps money flowing to defense contractors, supposedly floats whether it's through the military directly or through the jobs created by our munitions industry. I mean, this is a very powerful sector of the United States economy, even if Elon Musk and his buddies are promising to go through the Pentagon and eliminate waste and inefficiencies. So I think that there should be very clear expectations around what Trump's arms export policy is to Israel, which is just build, bomb, send as many weapons as is profitable for us and relevant for them. And I think that military partnership is really important. And we shouldn't, distract from the fact that it's not the only one in the region. I mean, unlike Gaza and the question of what is to be done with the Palestinian people from the US American perspective, I think that in Ukraine, we do see different perspectives that are contending there inside the Republican Party. One part of that Republican Party really does perceive Russia as an adversary, not as a partner, not as an ally, someone that needs to be defeated, depleted, destroyed. And ideally, in a world that they would design, with some kind of change of regime to put someone very West-friendly, putting questions of democracy aside, at least someone that we could control as we liked to control Russia in the post-Soviet period. It's no surprise that Donald Trump himself has very little love for Volodymyr Zelensky. It's no surprise that Trump is convinced that this war never would have happened under his watch. And it's no surprise that Trump believes that Putin is someone with whom he can negotiate. Similarly, he believes he can negotiate with basically any world leader, whether it's Kim Jong-un or Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, or indeed Xi Jinping of China. I think what's more interesting is how this narrow question of the terms and conditions of Ukraine's reconstruction or territorial integrity fits into a larger grand strategy that's coming out of the Trump camp, which is, what is the world we're trying to build? Who are the allies we need to bring on side for it? And who are the adversaries that we're singling out in order to sustain what everyone agrees must be a new American century, a new Pax Americana, or not even a Pax Americana, at least just a new hegemonic system, or a renewed hegemonic system in which the US is epicentral and controls all the levers of power, be they financial, economic, or military. I think the point about Ukraine has to be that it's a highly dynamic conflict. There has been an overestimation of US-American coherence on the issue, especially in the early days of the conflict. It also seemed equally bipartisan between Democrats and Republicans, that what needed to happen in Ukraine was we needed to arm Ukraine heavily. We needed to pursue a strategy of total victory, and ideally extend that total victory all the way to Moscow in terms of taking on this regime. This was not a Biden proposal. This was a sort of US-American proposal. And if you look back at the congressional votes in the House and the Senate, there are very few dissenters. Trump really represents a very kind of fringe position on this. Obviously with its own megalomaniacal characteristics in terms of, or messianic characteristics in terms of thinking that he can deliver some peace or make some deal. And there are some really fringe components of his MAGA camp that have found their way to the White House and into the annals of the security state. But I think the broader point is that I don't think that we should take anything for granted about what the direction this is taking. It's a highly fluid and dynamic situation. The Europeans haven't made up their minds exactly about how they want to respond to a new phase of tension in the Atlantic relationship. We saw that mini summit in Paris, hosted by Macron. We saw the very angry, oftentimes anonymous statements being shouted out from the Munich Security Conference. And so I think it's too early to tell exactly what's going to prevail, because as I said before, in the case of Gaza, I think it's similar to the case of Ukraine. Trump's putting on the table something ludicrous, absurd, control of 50% of Ukraine's natural resources as a condition for overseeing the implementation of some kind of peace plan. This is designed to work back to some alternative arrangement where the Trump administration is in charge. They perceive themselves to be winners. At least they can sell it to their supporters in some way. But I think it's too early to tell what those conditions are, especially as someone like Zelensky looks further afield in terms of the interlocutors for peace, to people like Erdogan or possibly even China. I mean, to see about alternative arrangements for cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, or resolving the territorial conflict that obviously kicked off 10 years ago. I think that it's too early to tell whether the Trump administration will even be the driving force or have the ultimate word when it comes to if and how that conflict comes to an end.